Hey everyone, welcome back to Citywide Blackout, our first episode of 2025.
Happy New Year's, Max, 2025. And we have an explosive guest for you today.
That's right. He is a New York Times best-selling writer and 5-time Bram Stoker Award winner. He's the creator of the Pine Deep Trilogy, V-Wars, Rotten Ruin, and Joe Ledger. That's right, folks. Jonathan Maberry joins us. And we'll be talking all about his soon-to-be-released book, Burn to Shine, the adaptation of his Joe Ledger and Rotten Ruin series to the worlds of film and television. We'll do a deep dive into the characters and so much more.
Citywide Blackout starts right now.
Welcome to Citywide Blackout with your hosts, Max Bowen and Curtis Hughes. With years of experience in journalism, music, and entertainment business, they put their knowledge to work, bringing you the best in-depth, fun, and sometimes outrageously bizarre interviews with authors, musicians, and many other creators from around the world. With the right amount of gusto and a few F-bombs thrown in for emphasis, you're sure to have a good time. So put up your feet, grab a beverage, and let's go.
Hey everyone, how's it going? And welcome back to the show, our first interview of 2025. I'm your host, Max Bowen.
And I'm Curtis Hughes. Max, how was your holiday season?
My holiday season was absolutely wonderful, Curtis. We have a rare gift for this episode, my friend, because we are talking to, I would say, one of my personal heroes in the writing world. When I found out we were doing this, my head exploded a little bit because this is it, man. I think we can actually retire after this is all done.
We're going for it.
Pack it in. We're done because we get to be joined by the one and only Jonathan Maberry. Jonathan, welcome to the show, man. It's great to have you here.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Curtis. I'm glad to be here. And if I'm your high point, this is you have low standards. I'm just saying.
No, sir. This is
a professional pop culture nerd. So
Hey, I love that job title. I want that job someday. I would love that. No joke. I've been a fan of your books since really the beginning. Actually, when I first read Patient Zero, which was lent to me by my buddy Ron. So he's the one who kind of got me into this, and from there it was just off to the races. And getting to talk to you about all the books is this is it for me. This is it. But let us dive right in because there's so much to talk about. The big news, of course, being Burn to Shine. Set to drop on March 5th, your 14th book in the Joe Ledger series. But what is this one all about?
Well, I had a little fun with Burn to Shine because it brings together characters from my first 4 novels. My career started with the Ghost Road Blues trilogy. So the characters in the small town of Pine Deep, a fictionalized version of the real town of New Hope, Pennsylvania. So it's based on that. And so I have Malcolm Crowe, Iron Mike Sweeney, and a couple others from those books, and I have characters from several other projects of mine, all converging there. My werewolf private investigator, Sam Hunter, is in the story, and my mystic skip tracer, Monk Addison, is in the story, and a character actually created by a friend of mine, Marie Whitaker, a character named Charlie, who's a freelance agent working with Arklight. I folded her into the story. She and I co-wrote a story about that character, and it's a fun character, so she's in there. So a lot of characters are in there, and they're up against the latest incarnation of Nicodemus, my returning villain. Also, some militia groups that have weapons left over from the Cave 13 novel. So it ties a lot of plot lines together in kind of a 1-2 punch, this book and the next book, that kind of wraps the Nicodemus cycle of stories. He's not dead. I mean, he shows up in the Kagan the Dam series, but it's going to wrap the Nicodemus story for Joe Ledger for now, or it's the first part of that 2-part thing. It's a self-contained story, a hell of a lot of action, and had a lot of fun with it. I think the fans will really dig the cameos and the crazy amount of action that's in this book.
Oh, I'll bet. And I know in the past you have done the occasional tie-in here and there, but this seems way, way bigger. So I'm curious as to sort of the planning when you decide, okay, we're going to bring this person in and that person in and this person in. How did all of that one come together?
Well, after doing, I mean, since I started the second half of Joe's career, I mean, the first 10 books he's with the DMS, Department of Military Sciences. Now he's an international troubleshooter with Rogue Team International. And when I started those books, the plots became a little different. You know, Rage was a very intense book that had a very tragic ending. Relentless was Joe Ledger's psychological, destruction for a while. Cave 13 was a weird one that tied Middle East politics together, but all of them kind of are components toward kind of a big battle that's coming. And this, the seeds for this were planted in Cave 13 with a character called Mr. October. It also brings back a villain that a lot of readers assume is dead, but is not. I mean, the title of the book should give you an idea of which villain is coming back. Let's face it. I'm just going to say, you shoot a zombie in the chest, you're not going to kill the zombie, even if you think you did. So that's fun, and actually kind of an odd emotional journey with the character. But I've been kind of building toward this, and I knew I wanted to bring characters from my other books in because I want to kind of really cement that this is one big world. You know, the Joe Ledger's world is a very strange one. Even if he doesn't always believe that there are things that are beyond science, the readers know because they kind of glimpse over the writer's shoulder in certain scenes to get an idea. And that's fun too. The world is bigger and bigger and bigger than Joe expects, and he keeps having to adjust his worldview and to be able to cope with it.
Oh, excellent. I love this. All right, so let us talk a bit about your title, Burn to Shine. For those who are the longtime readers, they're going to recognize this one right off the bat. It's mentioned towards the end of Cave 13. How does this tie into the overall story?
Well, the first Burn to Shine dealt with a member of the Department of Military Sciences who was a good person, but who kind of leaned into her own needs and desires and in a way that corrupted her and made her a villain. The character Artemisia Bliss, who took on the persona of kind of a deliberately cartoonish supervillain named Mother Night. She was very much a pop culture person and, really leaned into that and used the pop culture convention, Dragon Con Atlanta, which is, by the way, my favorite convention, used that to launch the bioweapon that was in the first Joe Ledger book, Saif al-Din pathogen, which she, as a scientist working for the DMS, was able to steal. So that was Code Zero, and it was the sixth book in the series. This one picks up with that character making a surprise return in a way that absolutely does make sense. It's not one of those supervillain things where you see the Joker get blown up and it turns out he was not really there. This actually does make sense, even scientific sense. But the trauma that she went through, first leading up to her becoming Mother Night, and the trauma since has changed her as a person into something very, very strange and dangerous, and even something that Nicodemus, who's the second villain in the story, has a hard time controlling. Which also establishes that Nicodemus is not all powerful. He's not omniscient. He's not omnipotent either. So it kind of establishes that, which is important for the next book.
Yeah.
And so much from it.
I'll bet you did. I'll bet. Let us talk about Nicodemus, because he's basically like your big bad. He is a recurring villain. But you mentioned this kind of wraps the story for now. Obviously, we don't want to know how. You got to read the book for that. The
next book wraps his story.
Gotcha. Okay.
Nicodemus, what he is has kind of been talked about enough on social media that this is not going to be too much of a spoiler. He's not human. He is an immortal trickster spirit, kind of like Coyote, like Loki, in that same zone, Anansi, and a few of the other trickster spirits. One of the fun things that we explore in this book and the next is he's not evil. That kind of spiritual being predates the concepts of evil, which are human concepts. And even if our culture, is older than we think, like if you look at places like Göbekli Tepe that are, 18,000 years old, and clearly civilizations lived before that, even if our civilization as a culture goes back, say, 20,000 years or 25,000 years, the Earth is 4.5 billion years old. So this character's concepts of, it just is beyond good and evil. What he is a chaos spirit. He loves create chaos because chaos is the opposite of order. Order is stability. Chaos is more in keeping with the galactic science in that it is the entropy in motion, change. Things happen during change. A sword can't be made without melting, mining the metal, smelting it, melting it, hammering it, changing it. All of those things make the sword. That process is chaotic. Birth is chaotic. So he wants chaos to happen because that is what he thrives on. And that is not good or evil. The reason he sides so often with villains is because good guys want order and villains don't. So he kind of keeps that, funds or promotes or advises groups to do chaotic things because, that's how he becomes powerful and stays powerful. And it's his joy. Not, even immortal spirits kind of come and go in terms of like when's the last time you met Loki on the street, right? So it's conceptual within the philosophy of mythology that these beings sleep at times, and Loki, Nicodemus may be running to the end of his cycle, because we know that for those who read the Mike Hagan the Dan fantasy series, he shows up in books 2 and 3 of that series as the Prince of Games, and that's 50,000 years in our future, after society's completely collapsed to barbarism and kind of clawed its way back up to a culture level approximating, ancient Greece. We're just coming back, and that's the point at which he rises again and gets again into the action. He's a fun character. I love the character Nicodemus, and like Mr. Church, when I created both those characters, I knew their full cycle of stories. Other characters, I kind of made it up as I went. You develop the character in each book, you want to build on it. Joe Ledger's like that. But Church and Nicodemus, I've known their backstories from the beginning, and I've laid clues from the beginning. So that's been fun. I like playing the long game. And a little side note, when I first sold Patient Zero, the first book in the series, I intended it as a one-off. And when the editor bought it, the process is the agent shops it, the editor buys it, and that's the point at which, once the deal is closed, the editor makes his first phone call to the writer, and that's where they have their first conversation. And during that first conversation, 5 minutes after the deal was closed, the editor's like, "So what happens in book 2? What happens in book 3?" And I'm like, "What now?" I had to make up stuff on the spot. I mean, just like pull it out of the air. And he called my agent back, and it turned into a 3-book deal. And now, I'm writing book 15. I've already sold 16 and 17. So we're going along, and there's a TV series in development. So, Joe Ledger continues to grow.
Yeah, I'll bet. All right, so we have talked about some of the villains in this story. Let's talk about some of the heroes. Of course, we have Joe Ledger. We have Rogue Team International. He's joined by the team of Arklight, whom, of course, you know well from the series. But you also mention in the book synopsis friends who may or may not be entirely human. Can we shed a little light on that?
Well, you have the character of Monk Addison, who is a former Spec Ops guy himself, who then became a PMC, a private military contractor, what they used to call a mercenary. And he burned out completely and then just kind of went on he just dropped his guns and walked off with the idea of trying to find a way to, rebuild his soul, because he figured he had done so much harm, because he never asked whether, the targets he was given deserve to be shot. And that's the case especially with the PMCs, where you don't get a chance to know if they're the good guys or the bad guys. They're just inconvenient to whomever's in power. That's corrosive to the soul. So he burned out, and then he found out by accident that he has a gift, and that gift is if the face of somebody murdered is tattooed on him, the second the tattoo is complete, he then relives their murder from their point of view. He's inside them as they are murdered. He can't do anything to stop it, but he can pick up clues from that murder and then try to find the bad guys and stop them, kill them. He's not a good guy. He's a good guy. He's not a nice guy at all. One of my favorite characters too. And so he's covered in these face tattoos. And we just had a book of short stories of him came out in December called Mystic. And having a lot of fun with that, getting some real nice feedback from a couple producers about, possible adaptation of that. We also have the character of Iron Mike Sweeney, who in the Pine Deep series is a 14-year-old kid. Now he's, close to 30, and he's a police officer in this small town. And he is two different supernatural things at once. He's a Dhampir because his biological, his spiritual father, so to speak, was a vampire. The character Ubel Griswold, who it was a werewolf who was killed, came back as a vampire, which is in keeping with, by the way, Western European folklore. In some countries, if a werewolf is killed, it comes back as a vampire. A lot of people don't know that. It's a really cool thing. You don't see it in movies. So he comes back as a vampire, but he doesn't have a body. He's a spiritual force. So he's the spiritual father of this kid. And a Dhampir is the son of, or the offspring of a human and a vampire. But his biological father, the physical father who impregnated his mother, was a werewolf. So he's both a werewolf and a vampire, and the combination has made him something unique, something that's never existed before. And I do intend a novel about Mike Sweeney at some point. Red Tears is one I have planned. And then there's another werewolf in the book, Sam Hunter. Another bit of folklore. There's a group of families in Livonia, like Poland, and that area of Europe. These families date back to Etruscan times, and they have always claimed, and this is, by the way, actual folklore. I mean, there are registries of these families and so on, that they claim that at night they turn into werewolves to fight evil. And the church, at one point, the Inquisition arrested one of these Benedicti. This is documented church history, which I love. I love the fact that church documents all this stuff. And the Inquisition tried to get him they tried to force him to admit that he was an apostate of hell and all that. And they couldn't break him. And the Inquisition is known for trying real hard. I mean, their torture is where they start. They go crazy from them. They couldn't break him. So they finally let him go. They figured that the only way he could have survived all they did is if he had the power of God with him. They even gave him the nickname, the Hound of God. So this, my werewolf character, Private Eye, is a descendant of that guy, of that family. And when he takes a client on, they become essentially part of his pack, and to do anything to protect his pack. So all of these characters kind of converge in Pine Deep around the same time. And we also have one of my favorite Pine Deep characters, Mr. Pockets, who is the single most powerful character I've ever put into any of my stories, even though he has a couple of scenes here and there. And there's a really, really interesting confrontation between him and Nicodemus. Nicodemus thinking that he's the big bad dog in that junkyard fight.
I love it.
Jonathan, I know that we've been talking, and I think some of the questions originally that I was kind of looking through, like forums and things like that, was, is this going to be, the last book in the series? Obviously, we've talked about that. We're just going to just ship sailing. So that's awesome.
Well, I'll keep writing Joe Ledger books until when I die, they'll have to bury me with a laptop because I'll still have ideas.
Oh, I love it. I really love that
Let me just
mentality.
ask about that real quick. Like, how do you stay so motivated to keep these things going for so long and off into the future?
Well, first off, I didn't start writing novels until I was in my late 40s. My first one was published when I was 48. I'm 66 now. So I got all those years of thinking of weird stories that are just buried in my head, and I want to write them. And plus, once you have a set of characters you really love, ideas never stop flowing. I have enough Joe Ledger books to do one a year for the next 76 years. I think I have 76 ideas kind of jotted down. So obviously I'm never going to write all those, but they just keep popping up all the time. And I subscribe to tons of scientific newsletters and medical science and research science and so on, political newsletters, historical newsletters. I read tons of books. A lot of the books on my shelves are nonfiction research books, because there's so much in history and science and politics that is a seed for a story. And sometimes you read something and, like, the average person would read it and go, oh, that's interesting. A writer reads it and goes, oh, that's a story. For example, the fact that during the Black Plague, you had something that killed 50 million people in the 14th century, right? This incredible plague. And yet some people, members of their family, would get it, and like their wife or best friend would get it and die, but they wouldn't. And we only recently discovered why. They have a gene that gives them immunity that's passed on to their kids, which is why in the 17th century, when the Black Plague hit London again, very few people died, because that immunity was, there was a larger percentage of immune people who survived, which means a larger percentage of the population was immune, and therefore fewer people died later on. Well, to me, that's a story. And also the fact that the Great Fire of London stopped that plague from spreading all through England, and nobody really knows how the fire started. So I worked that into my book, The Alchemist, which I'm writing, and now we do know how the fire started and why it started and who started it. And so history is great. Like there's a free newsletter, Popular Science, right? I got this a few years ago, like maybe 7 years ago, and there was an article in there about squids, and there was a squid that released a certain type of chemical, female squid, that caused the male squids to go completely bonkers with rage, and they would kill each other, and the one that survived got to mate with her. It sounds like 28 days later of the dating game, right?
Right.
So that became the novel Rage. That became the bioweapon in Rage. Every time science comes up with something that's kind of a head scratcher or weird, a writer jumps in and says, "That's my next story." And by the way, when you get those kind of ideas, your excitement is being fired by a nuclear engine. There is no such thing as like, I'm too tired to do this, or I'm bored. Hell no. I'm having too much fun.
And so are we so far with this interview, I have to say. Also, with regards to Joe Ledger, the character itself, what's the writing process that goes through for the character and the worlds and everything with the series and the books? Talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, and it's different with each series. The Joe Ledger, when I sit down to write Joe Ledger, I'm in a different headspace than when I'm writing, say, a Kagan book or a Necrotech book or something. The characters kind of share your brain. Like when I'm writing Joe Ledger, first off, weirdly, I'm funnier writing Joe Ledger than I am in normal life. And I don't understand that. I come up with one-liners for Joe that it makes me laugh out loud when I'm writing them. I have no idea where the hell they came from. But that's what happens. You kind of embody the character. I get inside Joe's head. I get inside his darkness. Some of his damage I share. We both, the trauma that kind of set him on his path when he was a teenager is based on something that happened with me and my girlfriend when I was a kid. And that the damage and difference is his psychology was splintered. Mine was focused. I spent the rest of most of my life, 35 years of my life, teaching women self-defense, teaching self-defense to all sorts of specialty groups, because I was already in martial arts when that happened. Joe got into martial arts as a way of trying to save himself, and martial arts is what saved him from going completely off the rails. But so I found a balance in that. When you're writing these stories, if you get inside the head of the characters, they become real people to you. And often I base them in whole or part of real people I know, which allows me then to, like there's a character in one book that's based on my friend Randy Kirsch, a business guy whose kids went to school with my son. And I know Randy really well. I know his vocal tics. I know his accent. I know his background. I know his politics, his financial insights. And I know how, like, we've been in so many parties, you can see how somebody changes in personality depending on who they're talking to. And so if I'm seeing him, he'll speak one way to, say, the principal of the school, another way to his buddies who he watches baseball with, et cetera. So that allows me to build characters based on the multifaceted nuance of real people. And if the characters become that real to me, I'm never at a loss of how to write them, because I'm just basically reporting on people that I observe. And that becomes a lot of fun. It makes it easier to populate the books, to keep the characters unique, and keep them separate in my head too. So, like, if I'm in a Joe Ledger headspace, I'm not in the same headspace as Monk Addison. They're based on different people. And I can't get them confused, because you wouldn't confuse two people that with one another, if you know them well. And that allows me to as soon as I sit down to write, I'm surrounded by people who are helping me. All these characters in my head are people who are helping me. And it makes it an easy and fun process that is also extremely effective as a writing tool.
Hey, this is John F. Mers, author, actor, and owner of 1021 Studios, and you're listening to Citywide Blackout.
All right. So we've just learned a lot about Joe Ledger, and this is one of your main characters. And I'm curious as to how would you say he has evolved or changed over the course of this 14 book series, and of course numerous other short stories as well.
Well, and also he's in two other series. He's in books 2 and 3 of the Dead of Night series as a
That's right.
like a
Yeah.
5-year-old man, and he's in books 3 through 7 of the Rotten Ruins series as a 65-year-old man. So we get to see his evolution from 32 to 65 through a series of 3 series of books. When he started out, he was ambitious, skilled, but not worldly. He was worldly to a degree, like the kind of guy who would be within his group of friends considered, pretty on the ball, but not knowledgeable about how the world's really wired. And with each book, he becomes more like that. He is damaged more and more by what he does, which is true. I mean, there's a statement made by Rudy Sanchez in the first book that violence always leaves a mark, and physical or emotional. And I know this firsthand. I grew up in an abusive household. I went through that trauma with my girlfriend, and I've lived a pretty strange life. I was a bodyguard for years. I was a bouncer for years. I've been in hundreds of confrontations as a bodyguard and bouncer. I worked at the club I worked at as a bouncer, God help me, was a strip club. I got hired. A friend of mine was managing the group of dancers, and they were getting pretty badly harassed, and some were getting attacked, in park lots and so on. They needed someone who would keep them safe. And they knew I taught women self-defense, and that I had a very low tolerance level for assholes. So they brought me in, and I became the cooler, the head bouncer. And it was one of those bars where there were fights almost every night. It was just that kind of a bar. And as a bodyguard, I worked in the entertainment industry, protecting rock stars and so on. And I've been chopped in the shoulder with a meat cleaver, stabbed in the stomach with an ice pick, slashed with razors, smashed by a van, shot at, all sorts of fun stuff, And that gives me a lot of insight into what the body can withstand, and also how those scars, affect you. So the scar on my shoulder from the meat cleaver, I have limited range of that arm. My rotator cuff doesn't really work that well anymore. So as a martial artist, which I've been doing for 60 years, I've had to adapt to work around my scars, to reinvent my way of fighting so that it worked for what I am now, not what I was when I learned the skill. And Joe Ledger's like that. So, he has a set of skills that are constantly evolving. He's learning new technology. He's been in fights with people where he's maybe won, but it's close. Like when he fought Rafael Santoro in King of Plagues, he came close to losing that fight. And the second time he fought him in Rage, he did lose the fight. In Relentless, where he fought him for the third time, he didn't lose the fight. He was a different fighter because of what he'd been through. He also realized, he's learned to manage his 3 separate personalities, then had to deal with a fourth that took him out of control, and is having to deal with the after effects of that. So, the character has become less naive, more worldly, more damaged, but also he's in a dangerous position of, it's almost kind of a practical hubris, where he knows how good he is because of what he's been able to accomplish. He's afraid that if he steps off the battlefield, the next guy might not be as good. And if that, and not that the guy couldn't be, but he might not yet be, which means that if he steps off the field, the game might be lost the next time. So he feels he needs to stay, even though it's kind of an irrational thought, because he knows he eventually will age out of the job anyway. I mean, even Mr. Church had to step off the field and go into management. So he's in that phase where he hasn't quite yet learned how to manage his damage, and be able to navigate forward. That's what I'm playing with in these couple of books. It's fun because he's not at all the same person he was. I just recently listened to the first 5 books in the series on audio, and I haven't listened to him in a long time. He's a much different person. Top and Bunny are closer to their original selves, but they've changed too. Church is definitely changed over the years, and we're seeing a much deeper view of him in the book that's coming, the one I'm writing now. But all the characters have changed. Bug is more serious than he was. He's been through some trauma, and some characters have been killed off along the way. Doctor Who, and so many, Khalid and John Smith are all gone now, and that changed. And some of Joe's allies, like Sam Amora, got burned out on the job and blames Joe for some of the trauma that's happened because he knows Joe's a risk taker. So they became acrimonious. So what I didn't want to do when I realized this was going to be a series is do the rinse and repeat thing they did with the James Bond novels. In the first 5 James Bond novels, he went through changes. He was dealing with a sort of PTSD from Casino Royale in his next book because of the torture he underwent and so on. And after his wife was murdered, he had to deal with that. And then toward the end of the series, and especially when other writers took it on, he was exactly the same person on page 1 as he was in the last page of the book. And that's a problem. They tried to address that in the Daniel Craig run of the show, but during Roger Moore, there was no personal growth. There was barely any during Sean Connery, and none at all during Timothy Dalton and Pierce Brosnan. Same character in each movie. That's a mistake.
Agreed. I want to ask a little bit more about Joe's trauma. You've talked about this, and of course, Joe has been through a lot, even from the jump, like from the first book. This is a man who has been through a lot, and it has somewhat broken him a little bit. Why was it so important to have this aspect to his character, and how would you say it kind of like shapes him?
I come from a family of veterans. I'm not a veteran myself, but I come from a family of veterans going back to, like, I'm not joking. I'm descended from the brother of William Wallace. So, our family has been in war of one kind or another for hundreds of years. And I see the effect generationally. Like my father, who was not a good man, I saw the effect of World War II on him. My brother, who went to Vietnam, I saw the effect on him. I mean, he did some tours in Vietnam and kept going back because he thought he would find his dead friends. And once the chaplain realized that's why he was going back, they got him out of the Air Force. And, he spent most of his life working with other veterans trying to help them, and then committed suicide 3 years ago because the PTSD caught up to him. The ghosts wouldn't leave him. Well, that's the thing with Joe. I mean, Joe's been through trauma, several different types of trauma. If he quits the game now, the ghosts are still with him. The trauma is still with him. This at least gives him an opportunity to do something about it, to do something with that damage for as long as he can. I used the damage from my own childhood and what happened to me and my sisters. I used that to teach self-defense to the groups who needed it. And this is an important thing about Joe, because there is a burden placed on a person by negative experience. You can be crushed by it. You can lean into it and become it. There are like my father was abused, and he blamed that for why he became an abuser. But evil is a choice. Evil is not an accident of birth, unless you're born as a sociopath or born with a chemical imbalance or a tumor or something. If you're choosing evil, you're choosing it. In fact, I think it was in Dragon Factory, where Rudy Sanchez is talking to somebody to explain. People talk about nature versus nurture as if that's a complete equation, but it is not. It is an imperfect equation. It's nature, what you're born with. It's your physiology and so on. It's nurture, everything you've experienced along the way, good or bad. And the third component is choice. What will you do with that? And Joe needs to fix the world. Actually, I think the thing that explains Joe's damage comes from Dr. Horrible's sing-along blog. If you ever saw that.
Yes.
It's a hilarious. It's, Joss Whedon did it with Neil Patrick Harris and Nathan Fillion and Felicia Day. There's a line in there where, Neil Patrick Harris plays a guy, Dr. Horrible, who wants to be evil. And we find out in this one scene that most people see and don't grasp, where he's sitting there talking, and the line he says is, "The world is broken and I need to fix it." Now, by itself, that sounds egotistical, but it's not. It's heartbreak. The world is broken so much he can't live in this version of the world. He needs to make it the version he can live in, no matter what and how that impacts everyone else. The world is broken and I need to fix it. It's sociopathy with a broken heart. Sociopathy with empathy, which is a really weird combination. When your heart is broken so much that you feel you have the right and the mandate to change the world to fit what your pathway to peace is. Well, Joe is like that too. Joe thinks, he couldn't save his girlfriend. He couldn't save her at the time, and he couldn't save her later when she eventually committed suicide. He can't win that fight. So he's going to win every other fight because he couldn't win that one. And all that, yes, he wins. He saves people. and is constantly chipping away at his psychological balance with each time. And he's aware of it, which makes it even worse. It's like driving the car that doesn't have brakes. You know it doesn't have brakes. You still want to get to your destination. You still want to not hit anybody along the way. It's a really weird place to be when you are that driven to change the world to a version of it that you can live in with peace. I haven't directly addressed this, but it's implied. His step down moment, the point at which he feels he could walk off the battlefield, is if there's total lasting world peace. And we know that's not going to happen. So he's trapped by his own sense of duty. And that's a dangerous thing. And I've met people like that in this world. I've met quite a few of them. Sometimes when you're talking to veterans, and they can be veterans of police, of military, of firefighters, any EMTs, same thing, have the same thing where they may have saved someone by going the extra mile, and somebody else wasn't willing to go into the burning building, they did. And now they think they need to go into every burning building. And they're trapped by their own moment of heroism. They don't consider themselves heroes, but they're trapped by the success of their action for fear that if they don't do it, it won't get done by anyone. And that's Joe Ledger in a nutshell.
Wow. How about his own personal life? Because Joe is, as we've seen over the course of the books, is not just a guy to pull a trigger or throw a punch. He's he's got a family, he has a lover, he has friends, but how does everything he's gone through, how does that kind of impact his ability to have these personal connections?
Well, this is something I'm leading up to in the series because Junie has been appearing less and less in each book. And he's becoming work obsessed. And that's eventually going to bite him in the ass when he realizes that he's endangering the thing that is perfect in his life, which is his love with Junie and hers of him. He's endangering it through doing what he's doing. And that will become an issue. She is wiser than him and sticks with him. But eventually she's going to have to address her own needs. Like, you're not with me. I'm alone. It's going to be a tough thing to write. Now, I'm not going to say whether they'll fix things up and be able to work more together, or whether he's going to lose the person he believes is the love of his life. That will be addressed in book 16.
So the whole series is deeply ingrained in bleeding edge of science. What kind of research goes in to making that happen?
Research is my favorite thing. I'm a total research junkie,
And it shows, and that's great.
Well, part of it started because I didn't go to school for creative writing. I went to school for journalism. So, they teach you to research on the fly. And I shifted my focus from being being a newspaper reporter to being a magazine feature writer, which is even more research heavy. And I wrote, about 1,200 feature articles over the years. I did a lot of that and a lot of different subjects, martial arts and bartending, skydiving, theater, all sorts of stuff. So when I'm doing these books, what I do is I look for experts. So I'll give an example of when I was doing Dragon Factory, I needed an expert on transgenic science because that was the key science they were using in the Dragon Factory. So I went online and researched news articles. I put the word transgenics in there, the word controversy, and the word expert. And that pulled up a lot of articles dealing with the controversies around cloning and other genetic manipulations. And every time, somebody's writing an article, they always want to bring some experts in, just like they do on TV when they bring in the talking heads, they bring in the experts. And they always give the credentials, because what the expert says is only as solid as the credentials he or she brings to it.
Right.
So if they're talking transgenics and this person is a guy who wrote a book on transgenics, it's nothing. But if he's a scientist working at Harvard, yeah, that's a guy, who's on the cutting edge. So you go to the website for whatever organization he's at, university, research lab, DARPA, whatever. They always have a contact page, a contact option. You write, and so I wrote, and I to a couple different universities where these scientists were out who were talking about transgenics. I asked if I could get a message passed along to them. A couple of them responded, and I started asking them questions. I told them what I was doing, And the thing about experts is they love talking to writers because they are so tired of seeing what they do misrepresented in TV and film. It's like if you ever want to see somebody get completely red in the face, ask any real world forensics collection guy, forensics, expert about CSI, the TV show. Big vein starts pulsing in their forehead because they hate that show. And litigators hate it because in courts, they have something they call the CSI effect. People are so conditioned now to believe anything a CSI person says that it can sway a whole court case. I when I was doing a book, in fact, this is actually the origin of Joe Ledger. I was doing a book called Zombie CSU, The Forensic Science of the Living Dead. And I reached out to over 250 experts in every possible field, from science to law enforcement, military, the clergy, the press, all these different fields, to ask them how the real world would react, research, and respond if zombies were real. The book was published for the 40th anniversary of Night of the Living Dead. And every single expert I talked to said yes to my interviews, and every single one of them, even the clergy guys, had already thought about the zombie thing. Who would, So I was able to get, I asked some SWAT guys about it, and, they got red in the face because of the movie 28 Weeks Later. Because the snipers, elevated shooting position with spotters, they go down to the friggin' street. No. And a friend of mine is in that film. He played Harold Perrineau, who plays the helicopter pilot. He was the guy from Lost. He's now on the show From on MGM. Great guy. The military helicopter did not have machine guns on it. In a combat zone, you would have machine guns, rocket pods, the whole nine. He actually had to, in the movie, they have the pilot tilting the helicopter to kill the infected with the blades of the helicopter. For so many reasons, from physics on just common sense, that is not a good option. If you had chain guns, those creatures aren't zombies; they're living infected. He could hover 20 feet above them with a chain gun, no more pursuing, infected. But so the SWAT guys hate that movie because most of them are ex-military anyway. So they, in Pennsylvania, where I was living, they set up a live fire exercise to show me how real SWAT guys would reclaim the street from zombies. I love that kind of stuff. I've been invited to go out on a nuclear submarine. I've been invited to autopsies, to ride along with forensics people, with cops, with EMTs. They all want to show you firsthand how it works. And some of them stay in touch. And every once in a while, when something happens, they'll get in touch. Like if there's an outbreak of a new disease, I was just about to start the book. I think it was Predator 1 or Dogs of War, I think it was. And one of my scientist friends who I'd interviewed for another book said, "Hey, there's this new new disease around. It's going to hit the United States probably in the next year. It's called Zika, but it's not in the press now." And I'm like, "Tell me about it." He told me about it, so I worked it into the book. Book came out right around the time Zika was hitting the news, and everybody thinks I'm the one that's well informed and prescient. I just know who to ask the right questions of. And now I have a guy, Dr. Ronald Coleman, who's actually now an ongoing character in the Joe Ledger books, who is in fact a molecular biologist and one of the best in the world. Absolutely top grade, working on a cure for HIV, working to bring the white rhino back from extinction. This guy's, he belongs, in my books. So now he's in my books. And I was, right before I got on this, podcast, I was texting back and forth with him, trying to come up with tests to help identify people who are naturally immune from the Black Plague, because that's the bioweapon in The Alchemist. And he has all the answers for me, including stuff I would never know enough to even ask him. He anticipates it and says, "Oh, and by the way," that makes the books really rich. And I have guys like that in science, in politics, all over the place. And it's so much fun.
Hey, this is singer-songwriter and mental health advocate Stephanie Mathias. Be sure to check out my single Hero Side, available on all platforms now, and listen to Citywide Blackout, your home for the best indie artists.
And so I guess it's safe to say that the Joe Ledger series is 100% realistic?
Well, there's a phrase, it's a con man phrase, but we use it in fiction. The con man phrase is use 9 truths to sell 1 lie. So in science fiction, good science fiction, I use 9 truths, a scaffolding of truth, to help the reader suspend disbelief because they can trust in what they're seeing and reading. And then when I go off that scaffold into pure fiction, they won't know where the real science ends and the science fiction begins. And that's what makes the Joe Ledger book so solid, because in this day and age, you're reading a book, you see something, people just look it right up. Well, they find it most of the time. And that makes the books creepier, I've been told. And I'm all about that. So it's fun, It makes it a lot of fun.
I'll bet, especially when you think, oh, well, this is fiction, it can't really happen, and then your buddy sends you a link to an article and you realize, oh shit, this is actually pretty close.
Well, actually, that happens a lot. I mean, I did Predator 1, which dealt with GPS hacking, autonomous drive hacking, and drones. Right before commercial drones were available to the public, everything that's in that book, except for hacking the GPS on Air Force One, which, by the way, is actually possible. Every other thing in that book that I describe has since happened, and more besides. I talk about this, disease or that event or something else. The robot dogs in Dogs of War. When I first wrote about them, most people had never even seen any of the things about Boston Dynamics and the dogs they were developing for the military. Now they got those robots dancing, doing backflips and everything else, outrunning people. That's scary stuff. And you can actually buy a robot dog with a flamethrower. You can friggin' buy it now. It's on the market. You can buy. I mean, so any bloody fool can put together its own science fiction military right now. It's freaky and crazy. There are some things you don't want to be predictive about, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. On another note, Curtis, take over. I'm gonna go buy myself a robot dog. Be right back. But let us talk more, of course, about the big news: the Joe Ledger series being optioned by Chad Stahelski, who is the director of the John Wick series. I mean, come on, who else is gonna direct a Joe Ledger adaptation but this guy?
So here's the backstory of that. So my agent called me and told me that Chad Stahelski would like to meet with me, and I'm thinking, I wasn't excited at first, and I'm going to explain why. Ever since I had a TV show, I had a show on Netflix called V-Wars. It only lasted 1 season. COVID killed it. Launching a plague show at the beginning of COVID, bad timing. But because of that, and because of my proximity to LA, it's only a 2-hour drive from where I live. I get asked to come up a lot to meet with producers who are on basically fishing expeditions. They want to see what IPs, intellectual properties, short stories, novels, comics. They want to see what IPs I have in case it might be something they want to option. Sometimes they do it to see if you have an IP that they want to option to keep it from ever being made, by the way, because they maybe work on a competing thing. That does happen too. So, a couple of times I've gone up there and it's been a waste of time, but though I've actually not a waste of time. I've made friends, but nothing developed out of it. But I get to Chad's office and he has a bookshelf of all the Joe Ledger books, and they are very well thumbed. I mean, they've got Post-its and everything else. They've been read. He's been a fan for years, not just as a producer, but an actual fan of the books for years. And we sat down to talk. He was talking about scenes, lines, and plot points from books early in the series, and I could barely remember those things. And I've written a lot of books. I've written 52 novels in 18 years. So, you forget everything that you've written, or every little detail you forget. And he's really into it and excited. And the first thing he tells me, by the way, when I meet him, he says, look, I have no interest in making a Joe Ledger movie. I want to do Joe Ledger for TV. I said, and why would that be? And he said, because if you make movies, you're going to lose the character development. And Joe Ledger is all about character development. The high concept in each book is backseat to the characters. It's interesting, too, because unlike a lot of military-based thrillers, I have a little over 50% female readership of the Ledger books. The average readership for military thrillers is 5%. So, and I think it's the character development. And also, Joe Ledger's not a misogynist asshole. That goes a long way. He also cares about people, and he can be emotionally hurt as well as physically hurt. He's not Iron Man. He's not the kind of guy who goes through something and there's no emotional or physical cost. And that resonates with a body of people. So Chad and I sat down and we started banging ideas back and forth. What was supposed to be a 20-minute meeting lasted for hours, and we were laughing and talking the whole time. We since had a number of other meetings, and we swap pop culture stuff via email all the time. I'm involved in coming up with people to cast, to reach out to. Like I know he's been talking to Gabriel Basso, who stars in The Night Agent right now. Great show based on books written by my buddy Matthew Quirk, and I think they second season is on now, and third season's already being shot. And other actors that we know, some of which I can't name right now, but just say some really cool names have come up in conversation. And he's in the process now of getting ready to go out to find showrunners, and they have to read the books and audition to us. We're going to both be there with their pitches. But about 3 weeks ago, he sent me probably the most fun email I've gotten in a long, long time. He sent me a pitch deck and 8 sizzle reels. Now, for those listening who do not know what these are, a pitch deck is basically a big PDF where they take images from all different sources to show what characters might look like. So they like for Joe Ledger, they got 4 or 5 different actors, and they showing what he might look like in different scenes and so on. They get stills from movies to show what setups and scenes would look like from each of the books to sell the whole idea of the series. Sizzle reels are kind of like a movie trailer. So he has sizzle reels for the first 8 books, and the clips are from everything from the John Wick movies to 28 Days Later to the Bourne movies and everything. They can use this is typical in Hollywood. They can use these clips because they're not selling the reel itself. It's basically to frame expectations when they go out to showrunners and investors and studios. And but sitting there watching those sizzle reels, they put so much time and money into these sizzle reels. I'm astonished. They're gorgeous. I want to watch those movies right now, And I have to admit, my son and I have watched those sizzle reels way too many times. Throwing up on our big screen, sitting there watching them over and over again. Yeah, we're like a couple of kids. It's great. So Chad and I are having fun. And he's also, we're also talking about some other stuff. Like we've been having some discussions. He has the rights to reimagine the entire Universal Soldier thing, which was a great concept but bad movies. We have some really fun ideas. He's doing the Highlander thing with Henry Cavill. He's doing my buddy Jeremy Robinson's Nemesis series, which is all kaiju. He's doing a lot of fun stuff because the John Wick films were so successful, and he's only directed 4 films, and it's those 4 films. So he has 1,000% batting average here. He gets the opportunity to play with a bunch of stuff because he's as big a pop culture nerd as the rest of us. Also, he's also a martial artist. So, and he has the biggest stunt team in Hollywood. They do the Marvel films. They were involved in Wolverine and Logan, and he was his background. One of his early gigs was he was the stunt double for Brandon Lee in The Crow. And when Brandon died during the filming, they CGI'd Brandon's face over Chad's body. So a lot of the fight scenes were Chad. He's also Keanu Reeves' stunt double for The Matrix. So he has. He's a stunt guy and a martial arts guy. We really get along very well when it comes to fight scenes because the thing that attached him or bonded him to the Joe Ledger series is the fight scenes are accurate. No matter who or what he's fighting, if he's doing a move, that is a move a real fighter would do. It's not a flashy move. I talked to the head of his stunt team, Kale, who, by the way, looks like Bunny from the books. He is a gigantic, incredibly muscular guy, but he's also like a Southern California beach guy. He's basically Bunny. And hopefully we'll play Bunny in the show. But we're talking to him, and he said that they're going to have to actually change the nature of the fight scenes in the book to make them visible on TV. Because the real fight scene's over like that. I mean, as a bodyguard, I don't think I've ever had a fight last more than 3 seconds. It's 3 very violent seconds, but then it's over. And on TV and movies, you need the fight scene to go a little longer than that for entertainment purposes. Which, by the way, with Gabriel Basso in Night Agent, he's a legit martial arts champion. He's had problems because he keeps wanting to do the fight scenes the way a fighter would, not the way an actor would. So, but Chad and I are having a great time, and he's very optimistic about the future of this, of actually making it to television.
I am loving this news because, like, I think a while back it was talked about that it was going to be a movie or something like that, and
Well, yeah, it was optioned 3 times in the past. First time was by Mike DeLuca, who's a big producer in Hollywood, and we had Jeremy Renner and Kate Beckinsale attached to it as Joe and Grace Cortland. We had, to give you an idea how long ago this was, we had Kevin Spacey attached as Mr. Church, a long time ago.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah. This was being developed by Sony for ABC, and the president of ABC had to decide between either that or the remake of Charlie's Angels with Minka Kelly. And guess which one he chose?
Wow.
Killed his career.
Yeah. Well, choices were made.
Yeah. So when I saw last time I saw Jeremy Renner at Comic-Con, we both, like were pretending to cry about a little bit.
Yeah, right.
Then it was 2 other times by a different group, and both times they pitched shows that were way too expensive. Well, one was a show, one was a film. The one show thing, it would have been more expensive per episode than Game of Thrones, and that's ridiculous.
Wow.
I mean, I've sold well, but I haven't sold Game of Thrones well in terms of book sales. I mean, it's tens of millions of copies of his books.
Hold on, I gotta put in a comment on that because my it's exploded. But get the fuck out of here! Really?
Yeah. So obviously that didn't happen. And in the film version, they want to do something that there's a line producer is the type of producer who budgets out what a film would cost. And the film version they wanted to start with Extinction Machine. They liked the UFOs, but the budget, the anticipated budget for what they were talking about was like $225 million.
Whoa.
No, and they wanted to do practical effects rather than CGI. And, they just pitched the wrong thing. And they were going to the studios. The studios would like the pitch deck. And then we start hearing about the budget. You'd start hearing crickets in the room.
Yeah, right. No.
So, about 12 or 14 years worth of the Joe Ledger run, it's been optioned by people who weren't able to get it done.
Yeah.
Then Chad picked it up in May of last year. And man, I'm really optimistic that we're going to wind up on TV. Because he'll call me up, or email me or text me and say, "Oh, what about this guy for that role, or what about her for this role?" I'm like, "Yeah," and it's great ideas,
So, really, where are we at in the process? I mean, are we still like super early? Are we kind of like on the verge of getting cameras rolling?
No. It's still an option. And again, for the people who are listening, an option is not a production deal. An option means that somebody has leased the IP in order to try to put together a package that they can then take to a studio. And if the studio buys it, then that's a production deal. So Chad is, he has a pretty good track record for optioning things and getting green lights. And he's being very careful about it because he wants to make sure that when he goes out with the pitch, once we have a showrunner, the showrunner is the next big thing for us. With the showrunner and the showrunner's vision of the show, we'll have a much clearer idea of casting. And then we can go and get a couple of actors, attached to it. And that kind of a package, because Chad wants to direct the pilot episode. So we got the director, John Wick, wanting to direct the pilot episode. We have a director attached. We have a producer attached. We have actors we're talking to, and we're starting the process of interviewing showrunners. If we get that package together by May of next year, we'll go into production. But if not, he'll probably, it's a 1-year option, so he may have to renew it if it goes long. Like a lot of stuff that was optioned before the writer's strike had to be renewed by different people because of the delays and so on. We saw the same with COVID. Right now, we don't anticipate any blockages, but finding a showrunner the right showrunner is a challenge, because we've made lists, and right now there are about 6 showrunners we think are right for it, and all of them are on shows right now. From that list, we keep watching the news to see if a show has been renewed or is going to go into final season.
Yeah.
And if it's going to final season, we can start talking to them about something that might be going to production 1 year to 2 years from now. So
who would you think would be ideal to play Joe Ledger? And it can be anyone. Like, they don't necessarily need to be like currently working, but anyone out there who's ever been like in front of a camera. Who would you say would be like your pick to be the role?
Well, the guys I wanted for it are now aging out of it a bit. I had Jane and Ryan Reynolds in mind when I created Joe Ledger. Tom's getting a little old, and Ryan's a movie star. He's not doing TV. He's just not going to do a TV show. Plus, he'd be way too expensive. but he has the right. It is the Ryan Reynolds, believe it or not, from Blade 3.
Yes.
Where he was
yes.
buff.
Yeah.
Really, we can get to that guy, But Gabriel Basso, we both like Gabriel Basso. He's 6'1", blonde-haired, blue-eyed, and a martial arts champion. He's also a writer and a painter, so he has that artistic side. He's a good guy. He's respected by the women who have worked with him on films. Respected as somebody who's not an asshole, and he can do the action really well. So he's our number one choice if he's available. I don't know that I have a second choice right now. I mean, Jensen Ackles, but he's getting a little older. Some people have suggested Stephen Amell. He just landed Suits, L.A., and that's going to be on for years, so he's out. It's tough because you need someone who can be tough, ruthless, and funny and vulnerable. That's a hard mix for an actor.
Yeah, definitely.
That's why I like Ryan Reynolds originally, and Tom Jane. Actually, Tom Jane is the reason that Joe is blonde-haired, blue-eyed, and from Baltimore. The Tom here was actually died. I didn't know it at the time when I first met him. But that's why I had him from Baltimore, is because of Tom.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, it makes sense.
It's funny, my casting choices for Mr. Church are different, though, because even though he's described as a white guy, I kind of always liked Dennis Haysbert, who was the star of a show called The Unit. Big black guy. He did the State Farm commercials, a real deep bass voice, real good guy. He'd be a good Mr. Church. A lot of people like either Lawrence Fishburne or Idris Elba as Church. Weirdly, J.K. Simmons has been floated, and it's a harder sell because I don't quite see him as Church. He could play the administrator with an edge, but I don't see him as the field guy.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, I think because he has such a powerful voice.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because only he could do J. Jonah Jameson. I mean, perfect.
Yeah, he was born for that role. But also, we've talked about Timothy Olyphant.
Yep.
Which I'm a huge Timothy Olyphant fan. Going back to the not just Justified, but the remake of The Crazies, which I thought was a great and underappreciated horror film.
That was a great movie. I loved that movie.
And by the way, a little side note for those listening, I'm clearly a zombie fan. George Romero created the zombie genre as we know it. He also created the infected genre with The Crazies in 1972. Without that, we wouldn't have had 28 Days Later. We wouldn't have had the version of World War Z they made into a film, not the book version, but the film version is more infected than dead. And almost every Korean zombie film done recently is infected, not dead per se. So that's George Romero as well. And George was one of my dear friends. Actually, he and I did an anthology together called Nights of the Living Dead. And do you guys ever watch the show Psych when it was on?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Yep.
So the star of that, James Rode Rodriguez, is a buddy of mine, and we are in discussions with Peacock for a TV adaptation of that.
Well, okay then. I like this. I like this a lot.
And James is writing a short story for me for the next issue of Weird Tales, too. Yeah.
Nice.
But Jonathan, we really appreciate you going into the nuts and bolts and what goes into picking up the books for, TV and film. But talk to us a little bit about what actually goes into how the story gets adapted for those mediums.
Well, this is something I haven't been as involved in, and I'm becoming more involved in. When V-Wars was done, I didn't get any say at all in anything until the very last week of it. I was made executive producer, and the only thing I got to do was watch the cuts of each episode and give them titles for the episodes. That was it. With the second project, or actually the first project where I became executive producer from the jump, is the Rotten Ruin movie adaptation at Outcon Entertainment. They optioned it. And again, it was one of those fishing expeditions. I went up there, talked to the producers, the vice president at Outcon. And Outcon's a company that did The Expanse, Book of Eli, Blade Runner 2049, Blade Runner 2099, and other stuff. Great company. And they had me involved in every stage of deciding what the adaptation would be. They allowed me to approve the two scriptwriters. They had one scriptwriter, was one of the Marvel scriptwriters. I'm not going to name names, but we didn't actually like his take on it. He turned it into kind of a jokey buddy film, and it's not that. It's a tearjerker of a book. And this young guy, James Luckard, who works for Alcon, they asked him to just try this one scene that was emotionally complex. And I picked the scene because it was the one that the other scriptwriter got completely wrong. And I said, they have to be able to get this scene right. So they gave it to him. He turned in a version of that scene that literally had me sitting there in tears, reading aloud to my wife. We're both crying. It was so beautifully written. So he got the gig on my endorsement. And I got, when he would turn in drafts, they would send me the draft and I would actually give notes and then go up for script conferences. So I've been very involved in that. It's a 500-page book and a 90-minute movie. They're not the same thing. There's no way all of what's in the book is going to make it into the movie. Some characters had to be cut, scenes had to be combined, some new stuff had to be added to make sense of what was, of what the film version is going to be. And it is substantially different than the book, and I love it. And some readers will inevitably complain it's not the book, but it's a movie. It's a 90-minute movie. It can't be the same. So I got great advice early on from a friend of mine who had a TV show called True Blood, Charlene Harris. And she said, look, here's the thing is the show is never going to be your books, but the people who watch the show will read your books. Her books were only modest sellers before the show. And then she went and lived on the bestseller list for 10 years. And she said, that's what's going to happen when Rotten Road comes out. She said, people will see it and they're going to see what your version is and then realize there's 7 books. They'll gobble them up and they'll sell a gazillion copies. I mean, the book's already one of my most successful books. It's required reading in thousands of schools, et cetera. It'll go crazy. She said, same with Joe Ledger. She said, don't bitch about it. Don't be precious about everything that's in your story. Work with them rather than against them for 2 reasons. One, because you're not going to win if you work against them. Either they'll cancel the project or they'll close you out. And if you work with them, they'll include you in everything. And Alcon has included me in every single discussion, every stage of this since the beginning. Same's happening with Chad. We are working on the Joe Ledger TV development, not him and me out here orbiting Neptune. And that's because over time, I've developed a reputation within Hollywood as basically, and this is a quote, not being an asshole. If people said, I keep hearing you're not an asshole. I'm like, well, thank you. They said, so they're inviting me to conversations. They're letting me participate because I'm not being a whiny child about it. My version, the book version, will always exist. The audiobook versions will always exist. So I don't need to worry if the adaptation is different because it'll just steer people to my books. And hopefully the adaptation will be excellent on its own, which is like True Blood was. And I've actually had that conversation with George Martin in the early days of Game of Thrones where, he kept saying they're changing stuff, but you know what? The checks cash.
That's all that counts, right?
They're going, Jonathan, we like you. You're an adult with a level head in the room. Come.
Yes. And they'll ask me questions. They'll ask me to participate in creative discussions and just basically invite me up every once in a while to hang out and spend the day with the staff and talk. That doesn't happen if you're a problem child. And luckily, Hollywood is changing in its relationship with writers. More writers are starting to get the idea that playing nice means playing longer and being more deeply in the game. And I think it's because people like Charlene and Elmore Leonard, when Justified was on, and others going in the public space and talking about how they enjoy the process of adaptation and being adapted and being surprised by cool elements in the adaptation that weren't in their original works and how neat that is, And that's the space I'm in. I love the process. My day job is writing novels, so I'll always write novels. But if I can play in Hollywood too, yay! It's like comics. I love writing comics. Wakanda Forever was based partly on my run of the Black Panther. I was the first one to put Shuri in the armor. I put up against Namor, created the Midnight Angels, created the character Nika, all back in 2009 and 10. And because I've always been supportive of Marvel's adaptations, my son and I got to go to the premiere and hang out with the cast. And, there were people I know who were involved in Black Panther comics who were not invited up there for the reason that I and some others were. They invited the people who play nice. And also, from a business perspective, you play nice, more work comes your way.
Exactly.
So it's win-win no matter which direction you look in. You have more fun, you make more money, you make friends, and you get to play in this world.
Exactly. Well, folks, we are coming down to the end of this conversation. It's been an absolute blast, though, just learning everything about the new books and the characters and the projects. But Jonathan, as a writer, getting these deals, these potential like movie or TV show deals, is this like your Mount Everest? And if not, like, what is?
I'm not sure I have one specific. I mean, I have a bunch of stuff on the bucket list.
Yeah.
Ongoing TV show that lasts at least 3 to 5 years. That is a bucket list thing. A feature film out there. Probably the next personal goals I want to hit. I want to write episodes of the show. Not every one, but at least 1 or 2 per season. I want to write a film at some point. I'm more interested in TV than film, but I'd like to do both. I do not want to direct. I'm not one of those guys. I just want to keep playing in this world. I want to do this up until the point where I breathe my last, and as I said, I want to be buried with my laptop and a good Wi-Fi connection because I will have ideas. That's my Mount Everest is to continue doing what I love and be happy about it and provide for my family at the same time. Like I just found out around Christmas, I'm going to be a grandfather for the first time, which
congratulations!
It's like, thanks.
That's awesome.
Actually, it's the first time I'm mentioning it in public.
Yeah, it's amazing news, man.
So now I've got stuff that's going to be legacy for my grandson. And yes, it's going to be a boy. Orion. Yay. I've got the next generation and the generation beyond that. My son and his son will be born in July. I've got those to write for and provide for, to leave a legacy, and also, maybe make life more comfortable for them. That's a goal worth hitting. It's not what's going to shine a spotlight on me. What I can do for my family while having fun sounds like the best possible outcome for a creative life.
1,000%.
Absolutely. Well, folks, this is it. The end of the episode. People, if you're just hearing from Jonathan for the first time, you know what to do. You go to jonathanmaberry.com. Get yourself a copy of every single book. We're talking 52 books, guys. You have plenty. You have plenty to choose from. Personally, I was a big fan of the Pine Deep Trilogy. I loved that one. Of course, Joe Ledger was kind of my introduction to it. Just check it all out. Just read everything. You're gonna find something you'll like. And certainly looking forward to the release of Burn to Shine March 5th. That's the magic day, folks. March 5th. Keep it out there for more news about the TV developments, the film developments. Hopefully big things will come with that. And Jonathan, I want to say thank you so much for joining us. This is one of my Mount Everest. This is one of my bucket list things, getting to have you on this show.
Well, I appreciate that, guys, and you guys ask great questions. And I can't believe this was this long a podcast because it felt like it was 15 minutes.
Right.
So it's when podcasters are in the right zone, it's more like just sitting down, hanging out with friends and chatting.
Yeah,
and that's the vibe I had. So I appreciate that. Thank you very much, guys.
Oh, you're very welcome. Well, folks, this has been Citywide Blackout. I'm Max Bowen,
and I'm Curtis Hughes.
We will see you all next time.
Bye.
And with that, we bring this episode to a close. Thanks for listening, and if you haven't already, check us out on Facebook under Citywide Blackout, and Twitter and Instagram under Citywide Max. You can catch this and all your favorite episodes on your favorite podcast platform, and new episodes are added every week, as well as on Boston Free Radio every Saturday at 10 p.m. You get at me at citywidemax@yahoo.com if you want us just a guest, submit your music, or just drop us a line. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.